I had barely stepped out of my car when a man in ragged clothes appeared from behind the iron gates. His eyes were wild, but his voice was steady as steel. "Ma'am, don't go in there. She sabotaged everything." He reached for my wrist gently. "Your daughter-in-law. She changed the documents. You're about to be erased." My breath caught in my throat. For a second, I couldn't move. The crisp October air suddenly felt colder than death. I turned toward the grand White House, the one Harold built with his bare hands, now filled with people pretending to mourn while plotting behind my back. Inside that very house, my family was gathered for what they called a simple estate dinner. I had dressed in pearls for what I thought was a celebration of Harold's life. But when I opened the double doors and stepped into the dining room, Chloe looked up, saw me standing there, and collapsed on the floor. Just like that. Fainted, cold as stone. That's when I knew. Frankie hadn't lied, and I wasn't losing my mind. They had planned to take everything, and tonight, at my own dinner table, I would expose them. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 months after Harold's funeral. I was pruning roses in our garden. His garden, really, when the phone rang. It was Derek, our son. "Mom, Chloe and I want to have a family dinner at the country house next Friday," he said, his voice oddly formal. "To honor Dad. We thought it would be nice to gather everyone where he was happiest." I paused, scissors suspended mid-cut. The country house had been Harold's pride, a sprawling white colonial, on 5 acres in New Paltz that he'd restored himself over decades. Since his passing, Chloe had insisted we avoid it. "Too many memories," she'd said with practiced sympathy. "That's unexpected," I managed. "Bring that casserole Dad loved," Derek added, too quickly. "The one with the crispy onion topping." I agreed, but after hanging up, I stood motionless among the roses. Something felt off. Derek hadn't mentioned the country house in months, and now suddenly a formal dinner. The timing struck me as peculiar, coming just days after I'd inquired about Harold's will. At 64, I wasn't naive. Grief doesn't make you stupid. Sometimes it makes you more perceptive. You notice things, shifts in tone, averted gazes, conversations that halt when you enter a room. I'd noticed plenty in the months since Harold's heart gave out on a Tuesday morning. How Chloe's sympathetic touches to my shoulder had grown less frequent. How Derek's calls became shorter, more businesslike. How Mr. Harrington, Harold's lawyer for 23 years, no longer returned my messages. "We're handling everything, Mom," Derek had assured me. "You just focus on getting through each day." And I had been focusing on that, the crushing weight of emptiness where my 40-year marriage had been. The silent mornings without Harold's off-key humming. The cold right side of the bed where his warmth should be. But I wasn't dead myself, just grieving. The next day, I called Mr. Harrington's office again. His secretary, a new girl I didn't recognize, informed me that he was handling the Whitmore estate matters directly with the primary beneficiaries. Primary beneficiaries, plural. "I'm Grace Whitmore," I said carefully. "Harold's widow." A pause. "Oh, of course, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll have Mr. Harrington call you back immediately." He didn't. 3 days before the dinner, I drove to his office unannounced. The receptionist's eyes widened when I gave my name. "Mr. Harrington is in court today," she said, shuffling papers nervously. "Then I'll wait for his associate," I replied, settling into a chair with the quiet determination that had served me well through 4 decades of marriage, raising a son, and surviving breast cancer 10 years prior. An hour later, a young lawyer I'd never met emerged. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm James Keller. I understand you have questions about your husband's estate. I'd like to see a copy of the will," I said simply. His hesitation was brief but noticeable. "Of course, though I understood Derek was handling matters on your behalf. Did I sign something to that effect?" I asked, my voice steady. "Well, there are some provisions regarding assistance with financial matters, given your situation." "My situation?" He looked uncomfortable. "Your health considerations. The medical declaration." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What medical declaration?" Now he looked genuinely confused. "The competency evaluation." "From Dr. Winters?" Dr. Winters, a name I didn't recognize. I'd been seeing Dr. Matthews for 20 years. I maintained my composure, thanked the young man, and left without the document I'd come for. Instead, I had something far more valuable: confirmation of my suspicions. That evening, I sat in my garden as twilight descended, thinking of Harold. We'd met when I was 23 and he was 25, both teachers at the same high school. He taught shop, I taught English literature. He built things with his hands. I built worlds with words. Together, we'd constructed a life. "What would you do, Harold?" I whispered to the darkening sky. The answer came to me in his voice, clear as day. "You already know, Gracie. You always do." The next morning, I visited my actual doctor, Dr. Matthews, and asked if he'd signed any medical declarations regarding my mental competency. "Absolutely not," he said, visibly disturbed. "You're one of my sharpest patients, Grace. Always have been." I nodded, unsurprised. "Could I have a letter stating that?" "For my records." He wrote it immediately, his expression troubled. "Grace, is someone suggesting otherwise?" I carefully folded his letter into my purse. "Just preparing for Friday's dinner." The day before the gathering, I drove past the country house, not pulling in but slowing on the road. A black Mercedes I didn't recognize sat in the driveway. Through the large front windows, I could see Chloe gesturing animatedly to someone inside. That night, I slept poorly, dreams filled with Harold's voice, whispering warnings I couldn't quite hear. I woke at dawn, made coffee, and sat watching the sunrise paint our bedroom wall gold, just as it had every morning for 30 years in this house. "I won't let them take everything you built," I promised aloud. Friday arrived, with perfect fall weather, crisp air, golden light, leaves turning flame red on the maples lining our street. I dressed carefully. A navy blue dress Harold had always loved, my anniversary pearls, sensible heels. I applied makeup with a steady hand, pinned my silver hair into a neat bun, and picked up my mother's vintage handbag, large enough to hold what I might need. The casserole sat cooling on. The counter, Harold's favorite, made exactly as he'd liked it. I wrapped it carefully, placed it in a carrier, and walked to my car with deliberate steps. The drive to New Paltz took 40 minutes. With each mile, my resolve strengthened. Whatever awaited me at that dinner, I would face it with the quiet dignity Harold had always admired in me. I was nearly there when my gas light came on. I pulled into a small station just 2 miles from the estate, filled the tank, and was returning to my car when I first saw him. A thin man in a worn jacket, watching me from beside the air pump. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he called softly. I paused, keys clutched in my hand. "Do I know you?" He approached cautiously, like someone might approach a nervous animal. "My name is Frankie Doyle. I worked at Harrington's firm, filing clerk. I got fired last week." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, reaching for my car door. "They fired me because I asked questions," he continued urgently, "about what they were doing to you. And that's when my quiet Friday evening, and the rest of my life, changed forever." "What do you mean, what they were doing to me?" I asked, my hand frozen on the car door handle. Frankie glanced around nervously. "Not here. Can we sit in your car for a minute? Please?" Against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door and let him in. There was something in his eyes. Desperation? Yes, but also decency. "I'm sorry about your husband," he began. "Mr. Whitmore seemed like a good man, from the documents I processed." "He was," I said simply. "Now please, what were you saying about Harrington's firm?" Frankie took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, I was filing paperwork for the Whitmore estate. I noticed some inconsistencies, signatures that didn't match across documents, dates that seemed altered. When I brought it to Mr. Keller's attention, he brushed me off. My heart began to pound. "Go on." "Then last Friday, I was working late. Harrington and your daughter-in-law came in after hours. I was in the file room. They didn't know I was there." He paused, swallowing hard. "Mrs. Whitmore, they were discussing how to finalize the transfer of assets before you could cause problems. Your daughter-in-law said something about making sure you signed papers at a dinner." "Tonight's dinner," I whispered. He nodded. "She mentioned something about medical declarations, being backdated, about how Derek was finally on board. I didn't hear everything, but I recorded some of it on my phone. Force of habit. I used to be a journalism student before." He gestured vaguely at himself, at what I now recognized as the threadbare dignity of someone who'd fallen on hard times. "You recorded them?" My voice rose slightly. "Yes, ma'am. And I made copies of some documents. Before they fired me on Monday, claimed I was stealing office supplies." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a wrinkled envelope. "These prove they forged your signature on a mental competency declaration. They're planning to have you sign new documents tonight that would effectively transfer everything to your son and his wife, with you as a ward under their control. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Why are you helping me? I asked. You don't know me. Frankie looked down. My grandmother. Same thing happened to her. By the time we realized what my uncle had done, she'd lost everything. Died in a state facility. Nobody deserves that. I opened the envelope. Inside was a medical declaration signed by a Dr. Winters, stating I was experiencing cognitive decline and occasional disorientation. Below was my signature, a reasonable facsimile, but not mine. The difference was subtle but clear. The loop of my G was wrong, the cross on the T too long. Also included was a draft amendment to Harold's will, removing me as executor and granting Derek and Chloe full power over all assets for the protection and care of Grace Whitmore. Mr. Harrington was your husband's lawyer for decades, Frankie continued, but I think your daughter-in-law got to him somehow. There's been a lot of closed-door meetings, a lot of cash withdrawals from the estate's preliminary account. Bribes, I said flatly. Probably. He hesitated. Mrs. Whitmore, there's something else. The voice recording. Your daughter-in-law mentioned someone named Martin. Says he's taken care of and won't contest anything. I felt the blood drain from my face. Martin Ellis had been Harold's business partner for 15 years. They'd owned a successful custom furniture company together before selling it for a substantial sum 5 years ago. Martin was named in Harold's will. I knew that much. When was the last time you spoke to him? Frankie asked. Not since the funeral, I admitted. He sent flowers, but I assumed he was giving me space. You might want to call him, Frankie suggested gently. I nodded, my mind racing. Frankie, is there a copy of the original will? The real one? I couldn't get that, but he pulled out his phone. I have this. He pressed play on a recording. Chloe's voice emerged, clear and cold. Once we have her signature tonight, it's done. She'll never know what hit her until she's already moved to assisted living. The medical declaration gives us everything we need. Harrington's voice replied, And your husband is completely on board now? Derek will do whatever I tell him to do, Chloe said with a laugh. He always has. Besides, he's convinced his mother is losing it anyway. All those little incidents I've been pointing out to him. I felt physically ill. What incidents? Frankie looked pained. From what I gathered, she's been gaslighting you. Moving things, hiding items, then telling your son you're forgetting things or acting strangely. The missing earrings. The rescheduled doctor's appointment I supposedly forgot. The unpaid bills Derek had found and shown me with concern. I need to call Martin, I said suddenly, pulling out my phone. Martin answered on the third ring. Grace, is everything okay? Martin, I need to ask you something important. Have you been contacted about Harold's will? About any changes? A long pause. How did you know? Chloe called me last month, said you were having some memory issues and that the family was restructuring things to make it simpler. She offered to buy out my share of what Harold left me, at a fraction of its value. When I hesitated, she mentioned that you had agreed it was for the best, given your condition. And you believed her? I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. No, he said firmly. That's why I called Harrington. He confirmed everything she said, which is when I knew something was wrong. Grace, you're the sharpest woman I know. And Harold would never have wanted this. Relief flooded through me. Martin, I need your help. Are you free tonight? For you and Harold? Anything. After arranging to meet Martin at the estate in 2 hours, I turned to Frankie. I need to get to the dinner. But first, would you be willing to make one more recording? A statement about what you've seen and heard? He nodded without hesitation. 20 minutes. Later, with Frankie's statement recorded and the documents safely tucked into my handbag, I drove the final stretch to the country house. The sun was setting, painting the white colonial in shades of amber and gold. Cars lined the circular driveway, more than I expected for a family dinner. I parked behind a luxury SUV I didn't recognize and sat for a moment, gathering my strength. Through the large windows, I could see figures moving about in the dining room. My dining room, in the house Harold built for us. That's when Frankie appeared again, having followed me from the gas station. He approached my window. Ma'am, don't go in there alone. She sabotaged everything. He reached for my wrist gently. Your daughter-in-law, she changed the documents. You're about to be erased. looked into his concerned eyes, and felt an unexpected calm settle over me. I know, Frankie, but I'm going in anyway. And with that, I stepped out of my car, casserole in hand, and walked toward the house that contained both my past and my future. The grand foyer of our country home welcomed me with familiar scents: lemon polish on the oak banisters, lavender sachets in the hall cabinet, and something else now: tension, thick as smoke. I set my casserole down on the entryway table and listened to the murmur of voices from the dining room. I recognized Mr. Harrington's baritone, Derek's nervous laugh, and Chloe's practiced social trill, the one she reserved for impressing others. There were other voices, too, at least half a dozen people I hadn't expected. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed my dress and touched my pearls for courage. Harold had given them to me on our 30th anniversary. Like you, he'd said, they get more beautiful with time. I stepped through the arched doorway into the dining room, and the conversation halted abruptly. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I recognized our neighbor, Louise, Martin's wife, Elaine, Mr. Harrington, his young associate, Mr. Keller, Derek and Chloe at the head of the table, my place traditionally. 2 strangers in expensive suits sat with portfolios before them. "Mom!" Derek jumped up too enthusiastically. "You're early. We were just discussing—" "Grace?" Chloe interrupted, rising gracefully. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. "We were worried you might not feel up to coming." Something in her tone made it clear they had hoped I wouldn't come. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied evenly, still standing in the doorway. Harold loved this house. My eyes traveled to the table, taking in the formal place settings, the documents in leather folders, the crystal glasses filled with wine. This was no casual family dinner. "Please join us." Chloe gestured to a chair at the far end of the table, away from the paperwork. "Derek, help your mother with her casserole." Derek moved toward me, his face a mask of forced cheerfulness that couldn't hide the guilt in his eyes. My son, Harold's son, had always been terrible at deception. Even as a boy, his face betrayed him every time he tried to lie about a broken window or a missed curfew. "Actually," I said, opening my handbag, "I think I have something everyone needs to see first." I pulled out the forged medical declaration. I was surprised to learn I've been evaluated by a Dr. Winters, especially since I've never met him. The room went deadly silent. Chloe's practiced smile faltered. "Mom," Derek began cautiously, Can you explain this signature?" I held up the document, because while it's close to mine, it's not quite right. Harold always said forgery was the art of almost, but almost isn't enough in court. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think you're confused. These are routine protections, given your recent episodes." "What episodes would those be?" I asked, my voice steady. "The missing earrings that mysteriously appeared in Chloe's guest room drawer? The doctor's appointment that was rescheduled without my knowledge? The bills Derek found that had already been paid?" I checked my bank statements. Chloe's face had gone pale, but her voice remained controlled. "Grace, please. This is exactly what we're concerned about. These paranoid accusations." "I spoke to Martin Ellis today," I continued, as if she hadn't spoken. Chloe's composure cracked. Her eyes widened, darting to Harrington, who had gone very still. "Martin will be joining us shortly," I added. He was quite surprised to learn of my condition, especially since he spoke with me about Harold's custom furniture designs just last week, a conversation I recall perfectly. I pulled out my phone. "And then there's this recording from Harrington's office. Frankie Doyle was quite helpful." At the mention of Frankie's name, Harrington's face drained of color. "Who's Frankie Doyle?" Derek asked, confused. "The filing clerk you fired," I said to Harrington, after he noticed forged documents. I pressed play. Chloe's voice filled the room. "Once we have her signature tonight, it's done. She'll never know what hit her until she's already moved to assisted living. The medical declaration gives us everything we need." Chloe swayed slightly. Her eyes met mine, no longer confident but desperate. She took a step toward me, opened her mouth to speak, and then collapsed to the floor in a heap of expensive black fabric. For a moment, no one moved. Then Derek rushed to her side while Mr. Harrington stood abruptly, reaching for the documents on the table. "Don't touch those," came a new voice from behind me. Martin Ellis stood in the doorway, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers and Frankie Doyle. "Those documents are evidence in a fraud investigation," one officer stated calmly. What followed was chaos. Chloe regained consciousness, sobbing dramatically while Derek hovered between helping her and approaching me, indecision written across his face. The two strangers, who turned out to be notaries brought to witness my signing, slipped out quietly during the commotion. Mr. Harrington began a blustering legal defense while his young associate, Keller, sat ashen-faced, staring at his hands. Through it all, I remained standing in the same spot, strangely calm. This house had witnessed 4 decades of our family history. Holidays, arguments, reconciliations, laughter. Now it was witnessing its own kind of justice. As the police collected statements and gathered documents, I finally moved to the large windows overlooking Harold's favorite oak tree. The autumn moon illuminated its branches, now bare of leaves, exposed but still standing strong. "Mom!" Derek's voice came from behind me, breaking with emotion. "I didn't know it had gone this far, I swear." I turned, to face my son, our son. Harold's jawline, my eyes, 40 years of love made flesh. "What did you know, Derek?" I asked quietly. His eyes filled with tears. "Chloe said you were getting confused, that we needed to protect the estate, protect you. I signed papers she said were just precautions." Without reading them, my voice remained gentle, but the question cut deep. He flinched. "She handles our finances. Always has. And you never thought to ask me? To really look at whether I was confused?" His voice faltered. "I failed you, Mom. And Dad." In that moment, looking at my broken son, I felt an unexpected wave of pity. Derek had always sought the path of least resistance. Harold had worried about it. Our son's tendency to be led rather than to lead. "Yes," I said simply. "You did." He crumpled then, tears flowing freely. "Can you ever forgive me?" I looked past him to where Chloe sat, her makeup streaked, speaking rapidly to a police officer. Harrington was being escorted outside, his professional demeanor finally shattered. "Forgiveness takes time, Derek. Trust takes even longer." The next few hours passed in a blur of statements, signatures, my actual signature, and quiet. Conversations in corners of the house. By midnight, only Martin, Frankie, Derek, and I remained. Chloe had been taken to the station to make a formal statement. Harrington had been allowed to leave, but was under investigation. Martin squeezed my hand before departing. "Harold would be proud of you, Grace. Call me tomorrow." Derek sat slumped at the dining table, staring at nothing. "You should go. Home," I told him gently. He looked up, his face haggard. "What happens now?" "Now I go home to our house in town. You go to your apartment, and tomorrow we start figuring out what's left to salvage." After Derek left, only Frankie remained, awkwardly hovering near the front door. "Thank you," I said, meaning it deeply. "You risked a lot to help a stranger." He shrugged, embarrassed. "Did the right thing is all. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" His hesitation answered for him. "The caretaker's cottage behind the garden is clean and furnished," I said. "Stay as long as you need." As I watched him walk toward the cottage, I felt a strange sense of rightness. Harold had always opened our home to those who needed shelter. Tonight, I had continued that tradition, while also preserving everything else he'd built. The week following what Derek awkwardly referred to as the dinner incident unfolded like the aftermath of a storm. Debris everywhere, foundations exposed, unexpected structures both damaged and revealed. I returned to our house in town, the modest colonial where we'd raised Derek, where Harold and I had grown old together. The first morning after, I awoke, disoriented, reaching for my husband before remembering, both that he was gone and that our son had nearly betrayed us both. Grief is not a straight line. That morning it circled back with teeth. I allowed myself exactly 30 minutes of tears, then rose, showered, and made a pot of Harold's favorite dark roast coffee. Sitting at our kitchen table, I made 3 lists: legal matters, Derek, and moving forward. Under legal matters, I wrote, contact proper lawyer, review true will, secure assets, report Harrington to Bar Association. Under Derek, just 1 line, decide what forgiveness looks like. Under moving forward, I hesitated, then wrote, live. The doorbell rang as I was finishing my coffee. Martin Ellis stood on my porch, briefcase in hand, his kind face somber. I hope I'm not too early, he said. You brought breakfast, I observed, noting the bag from our favorite bakery. He smiled slightly. Harold always said no difficult conversation should happen without cinnamon rolls. We sat at the kitchen table, and Martin opened his briefcase. I've taken the liberty of contacting Patricia Winters. No relation to the fictional doctor, I assure you. She's the best estate attorney in the county and a personal friend. She'll meet us at 11. I nodded gratefully. Have you heard anything about Harrington? The police are investigating. From what I understand, Chloe approached him 3 months ago, shortly after Harold's funeral. She suggested you were showing signs of dementia and convinced him to help protect the family assets. Protect them for her? You mean? I said dryly. Martin's expression darkened. It appears she's been planning this for some time. The police found notes in her home office. Strategies for isolating you, making you appear incompetent. I felt suddenly cold despite the warm kitchen. And Derek? Was he part of this from the beginning? Martin hesitated. The evidence suggests he was manipulated, at least initially. Chloe systematically convinced him you were declining. The police found a journal where she documented her efforts, moving your belongings, changing appointment times, then pointing out your confusion to Derek. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my coffee cup. My own son believed I was losing my mind without ever really talking to me about it. People believe what they're prepared to believe, Martin said gently. And Derek has always been susceptible to stronger personalities. I thought of Harold's concerns about our son's character, his tendency to follow rather than question, his desire to please, particularly strong-willed women like Chloe. What happens to them now? I asked. Harrington will likely be disbarred. Chloe is facing fraud charges, though her lawyer is already floating mental health issues as a defense. As for Derek, Martin spread his hands. That may be up to you. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, documents, and revelations. Patricia Winters was everything Martin had promised. Sharp, thorough, and genuinely outraged on my behalf. By evening, we had secured the original will, kept in Harold's personal safe at his office, filed preliminary papers with the court, and placed a freeze on all estate assets pending resolution. I returned home exhausted but clear-headed. As I turned into my driveway, I noticed a figure sitting on my porch steps. Derek. My son stood as I approached, his face a mask of misery. He'd lost weight in just a week, his clothes hung loosely, and dark circles underscored his eyes. Mom, he began, his voice rough. I've been sitting here for hours trying to figure out what to say. I unlocked the door without responding and walked inside, leaving it open behind me. After a moment's hesitation, he followed. In the kitchen, always the heart of our home, I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. Only then did I face my son. Why are you here, Derek? He flinched at my directness. To, apologize. To explain. I don't know if I can fix this, but I have to try. Explain then. He sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. A gesture so like Harold's that my heart twisted. Chloe and I have been having financial problems for years, he began. My design business never took off the way I hoped. Her spending, he swallowed. We remortgaged the house twice. When Dad died, she saw his estate as a solution. So this was about money. Somehow that felt both better and worse than other possibilities. At first, for her, but then she started pointing out things about you. How you seemed confused sometimes, how you were forgetting conversations. She'd move your glasses, then find them for you when I was around. Reschedule appointments and show me your confusion. As evidence. And you believed her without question. It wasn't a question. Derek's face crumpled. I wanted to believe we were helping you, that we were protecting you and Dad's legacy. It was easier than facing our own failures. The kettle whistled. I poured 2 cups of tea, placing one before Derek. A mundane act of motherhood performed thousands of times over decades. I've left her, he said, abruptly. Filed for separation yesterday? I raised an eyebrow. Because she got caught? Because I finally saw her clearly, he replied, meeting my eyes for the first time. And because I couldn't bear what I saw in myself through her actions. We sat in silence, steam rising from our cups. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, wrapping the house in night. I don't expect forgiveness, Derek finally said. But I need you to know I'm sorry. More sorry than I've ever been about anything. I studied my son's face, the boy I'd raised, the man who'd disappointed me so profoundly. Grief and betrayal warred with decades of love. Forgiveness isn't a moment, Derek. It's a process. One I'm not sure I'm ready to begin. He nodded, accepting this. What can I do? I considered this carefully. Give me space and time. Make amends not just with words, but actions. And Chloe? The charges against her? That's for the courts to decide. I won't drop the charges if that's what you're asking. I'm not, he said quickly. She needs to face consequences. We both do. As Derek left that night, the house felt both emptier and somehow more mine than it had since Harold's death. I wandered through rooms filled with our shared history, touching photographs, books, the quilt Harold's mother had made for our wedding. In our bedroom, I opened his closet, breathing in the fading scent of him on his sweaters. From the top shelf, I retrieved a small wooden box I knew contained his private papers. Inside, beneath insurance documents and his mother's wedding ring, I found an envelope with my name written in his steady hand. I opened it with trembling fingers. My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've found yourself needing guidance. Trust yourself first. You've always had better judgment than anyone I know, including me. Remember how we built our first home? Everyone said it couldn't be done. Too ambitious, too much work. But brick by brick, we proved them wrong. You can rebuild anything, my love, even a life after loss. All my love, through all your days, Harold. I clutched the letter to my chest, tears flowing freely for the first time since the night of the dinner. Not tears of grief or betrayal, but of recognition. Harold had known, had always known, the strength I carried within me. Outside my window, the moon illuminated our garden. In the spring, new roses would bloom. I would be there to see them. November arrived with biting winds and the first dusting of snow. 3 weeks had passed since the dinner that had shattered our family's facade, and the legal machinery ground forward with glacial determination. Mr. Harrington had been suspended pending a full investigation by the Bar Association. Chloe faced multiple fraud charges, though her expensive attorney had managed to keep her out of jail on bail. And Derek? My son had moved into a small apartment downtown, filed for divorce, and begun therapy. All positive steps, though our relationship remained fragile, held together by tenuous threads of shared history and cautious hope. As for me, I found myself inhabiting a strange new reality, one where I was both victim and victor, wounded and strengthened. With Martin's help and Patricia Winter's legal expertise, I had reclaimed control of Harold's estate. The country house was mine again, as was the townhouse, our investments, and Harold's half of the business he had built with Martin. On this particular morning, I stood in the kitchen of the country house, warming my hands around a mug of tea as I gazed out at the frost-covered gardens. I had decided to spend more time here, not just to assert my ownership, but because something about the place felt right. Harold had loved this house. His spirit seemed more present among these walls than anywhere else. A knock at the back door interrupted my thoughts. Frankie stood on the porch, his breath visible in the cold air, a toolbox in one gloved hand. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, stamping his feet against the cold. "I fixed that loose shutter on the east side. Want me to take a look at the gutters before the heavy snow comes?" I smiled, stepping back to let him in. "Please do. And it's Grace, remember? After everything that's happened, I think we're well past formalities." Frankie had become an unexpected constant in my new life. After that first night when I'd offered him the caretaker's cottage, he'd repaid my kindness tenfold with his carpentry skills and quiet dependability. The cottage had been transformed under his careful attention, and he'd gradually extended his care to the main house as well. "Coffee?" I offered, already reaching for a mug. I'd learned he took it black with 1 sugar. "Thanks." He set down his toolbox and removed his gloves, revealing hands that told their own story, strong, calloused, capable. The hands of someone who built things, like Harold's had been. "Any word from Derek?" he asked, accepting the steaming mug. I shook my head. "Not since Sunday dinner. He's giving me the space I asked for." I paused, considering. It's strange. I spent decades being someone's wife, someone's mother. Now I'm just me, Grace Whitmore, still figuring out who that is. Frankie nodded thoughtfully. "My grandmother used to say that people are like houses. The structure stays the same, but the rooms get redecorated over time." I smiled at the metaphor. "And sometimes there's unexpected damage behind the walls that needs repair." "True," he acknowledged, "but that's when you find out how solid the foundation really is." Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Through the kitchen window, I saw a sleek black car pull up the driveway. "Expecting company?" Frankie asked, instantly alert. "No," I replied, setting down my mug, "but I recognize the car. It's Patricia's." Patricia Winters emerged from the vehicle, impeccably dressed as always in a tailored coat and leather gloves. Her expression as she approached the house was difficult to read. I met her at the front door. "Patricia, this is unexpected. I apologize for coming unannounced," she said, her tone professional but warm. "But I've received some information that couldn't wait." I led her into the living room where a fire crackled in the hearth. Frankie discreetly excused himself to check the gutters, leaving us alone. Patricia removed her gloves and coat, then extracted a folder from her briefcase. "The prosecutor contacted me this morning. Chloe is offering a deal." My stomach tightened. "What kind of deal?" "She'll plead guilty to lesser charges, document fraud rather than attempted elder abuse, in exchange for probation instead of jail time. And," Patricia hesitated, "full financial restitution." "Restitution?" I repeated, surprised. I was under the impression she and Derek were in financial trouble. Patricia's expression shifted slightly. "That's the interesting part. According to the prosecutor, Chloe has access to substantial funds, a private account in her maiden name with over $300,000. I felt as though the floor had tilted beneath me. Where did that money come from? That's what the prosecutor wanted to know. Patricia opened the folder and removed several documents. Upon investigation, they discovered regular transfers over the past 4 years. Money moving from your joint account with Harold through a shell company and ultimately to Chloe's private account. The implications hit me like a physical blow. She was stealing from us, from Harold, for years. Patricia nodded grimly. "It appears so. The prosecutors believe Derek was unaware. His name doesn't appear on any of the transfer documents, and the shell company was registered solely to Chloe." I stood abruptly, needing to move. Walking to the window, I watched Frankie on a ladder, carefully clearing leaves from the gutters. The mundane normalcy of the scene anchored me as my mind processed this new betrayal. "Does Derek know?" I finally asked. "Not yet. The prosecutor wanted to speak with you first. Given that the theft occurred while Harold was alive, you have the right to pursue additional charges." I turned back to face her. What would that mean? A longer, more public trial, more detailed financial investigations, and almost certainly prison time for Chloe. I sat back down, suddenly, feeling every one of my 64 years. And if I accept the deal, she makes full restitution of the stolen funds, plus interest. 5 years probation, community service, a permanent record, but no jail time. I thought of Derek, already devastated by his wife's betrayal and his own complicity in her later schemes. How much more could he bear? "I need time to think," I said finally. Patricia nodded, understanding. "Of course, but they need an answer by Monday." After she left, I remained by the fire, watching flames consume logs as my thoughts circled. Harold would have wanted justice, but not vengeance. He had always believed in redemption, in second chances. He'd given them to employees, to friends, even to Derek many times over. The sound of the back door opening announced Frankie's return. He appeared in the doorway, concern evident on his face. "Everything okay?" he asked. I gestured for him to join me. "Not particularly. It seems Chloe was stealing from us for years before Harold died. Money that was meant for our retirement, for Derek's inheritance, for the charities Harold supported." Frankie's expression darkened. "What happens now?" "That's what I'm trying to decide," I admitted. "I can push for more serious charges or accept a plea deal where she pays everything back but avoids jail." He considered this thoughtfully. "What feels right to you?" The question was simple but profound. What did feel right? Not revenge, certainly, but justice, consequences, the chance for real redemption. "I need to talk to Derek," I decided. "This affects him too." An hour later, I sat across from my son at a quiet corner table in the cafe downtown. His face had grown gaunt in recent weeks, his eyes haunted by regret and new understanding. I told him everything Patricia had shared. With each word, he seemed to fold further into himself, his shoulders hunching as if to ward off physical blows. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring into his untouched coffee. "I never knew," he finally whispered, "about the money. But I should have. The shopping trips, the renovations to our house that we supposedly could finally afford." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I didn't want to know. It was easier not to question. The prosecutor wants to know if I'll accept the plea deal or press for harsher charges," I said gently. Derek nodded slowly. "What are you going to do?" I studied my son's face, so like Harold's in certain angles of light. "What would your father do?" A ghost of a smile touched Derek's lips. He'd make sure she faced consequences, but he'd care more about making things right than making her suffer. Yes, I agreed. That sounds like Harold. Mom, Derek hesitated, then continued. Whatever you decide, I support you. I've been thinking a lot about what Dad always said, about how our choices reveal our character. I've made some poor choices, but I'm trying to make better ones now. As I drove back to the country house, snow began to fall, delicate flakes that melted as they touched the windshield. By Monday, I would make my decision. For now, I found comfort in knowing that whatever path I chose, it would be my choice, made with clarity and purpose, not manipulated by others. The decision, when it came, felt less like a single moment and more like the natural conclusion to a long conversation with myself and with Harold's memory. On Monday morning, I called Patricia and accepted Chloe's plea deal, with one additional condition. Beyond financial restitution, I wanted her to perform her community service, hours at a senior advocacy organization, helping elderly individuals protect themselves from financial exploitation. Poetic justice, Patricia remarked with approval. I'll present it to the prosecutor. By December, the legal matters were largely settled. Chloe had begun making restitution payments and, to my surprise, had accepted the community service requirement without protest. Mr. Harrington had surrendered his law license rather than face disbarment proceedings. And slowly, like a garden recovering after a harsh winter, my life began to find new patterns. I divided my time between the townhouse and the country estate, finding different comforts in each. In town, I reconnected with old friends, joined a book club, and volunteered teaching English to immigrant families. Working. That reminded me of my years in the classroom before Derek was born. At the country house, I focused on renewal. With Frankie's help, I began restoring areas that had been neglected during Harold's illness and after his death. We repainted the kitchen in a warm yellow that Harold had always wanted but I had resisted, repaired the stone pathway through the garden, and installed bookshelves in the sunroom. On a cold Saturday in mid-December, I stood in that sunroom, arranging books on the newly installed shelves while Frankie adjusted the final section. "Hand me that level, would you?" he asked, gesturing toward his toolbox. As I passed him the tool, our fingers brushed briefly. A small moment, but one that sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. A sensation I hadn't experienced in so long that it took me a moment to recognize it. Frankie must have noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said quickly, turning back to the books, just thinking about how different everything is from a few months ago. He nodded, focusing on the shelf. "Good different or bad different?" I considered the question seriously. "Both, I suppose. I miss Harold every day. I'm still hurt by Derek's betrayal, even as we work to rebuild our relationship. But there's something freeing about having faced the worst and survived it." "You did more than survive," Frankie observed, stepping back to examine his work. "You stood your ground. Not everyone would have had that courage." "I don't know if it was courage so much as stubbornness," I admitted with a small smile. "Harold always said I was the most determined woman he'd ever met." He wasn't wrong. Frankie began gathering his tools. "By the way, the Christmas lights are up on the porch. Want me to show you how to set the timer?" I followed him outside, where white lights twinkled along the porch railing and around the front door. Harold and I had always decorated extensively for Christmas, a tradition I'd let lapse this year. The pain of the first holiday without him still too raw. "It's beautiful," I said softly. "Thank you." Frankie showed me how to program the timer, his patience as he explained the simple device touching me deeply. It was these small kindnesses that had gradually transformed our relationship from one of necessity to genuine friendship. "Will Derek join you for Christmas?" he asked as we returned. Inside. "Yes, though just for dinner. He's volunteering at the community center serving meals earlier in the day." I began preparing tea, a ritual we'd fallen into after working on the house together. "What about you? Any plans?" He shrugged, accepting the mug I offered. "Not really. Christmas was my grandmother's holiday. Haven't felt much like celebrating since she passed." I thought of the cottage behind the garden, warm and snug, but solitary. "You should join us. Nothing formal, just dinner and perhaps some music." Surprise flickered across his face. "I wouldn't want to intrude on family time." "You wouldn't be," I assured him. "Besides, you've become—" I hesitated, searching for the right word. "Important. To this place. To me." A moment of silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken understanding. Then Frankie nodded. I'd like that. Thank you. That evening, after Frankie had returned to the cottage, I called Derek. I've invited Frankie to join us for Christmas dinner, I informed him. I wanted you to know. A brief pause. The guy who helped you expose Chloe? The one living in the caretaker's cottage? Yes. He's been a good friend through all of this. Friend? Derek's tone held a question. Yes, Derek. Friend. I kept my voice neutral, though I found myself irritated by his implied skepticism. Is that a problem? No, he backpedaled quickly. I just want to make sure you're not being taken advantage of. The irony of this statement coming from him was not lost on either of us. An uncomfortable silence followed. I'm sorry, he said, finally. That was out of line, especially coming from me. Yes, it was, I agreed, but without anger. Frankie has been nothing but helpful and respectful. He's earned my trust, which is more than I can say for some people who should have had it automatically. Derek accepted this deserved rebuke without protest. You're right. I look forward to thanking him properly for helping you. As Christmas approached, I found myself embracing small traditions that felt manageable. A wreath on the door, Harold's favorite carols playing softly, homemade cookies using his mother's recipe. On Christmas Eve, I visited his grave, laying a simple arrangement of winter greenery against the headstone. I'm doing okay, Harold, I told him, my breath visible in the cold air. Not the way we planned, but I'm finding my way. Christmas Day dawned clear and bright, sunlight glinting off fresh snow. I spent the morning preparing dinner, a smaller version of our traditional feast, but with all the essential elements. By the time Derek arrived at 3, the house was filled with the aromas of roasting turkey and apple pie. My son entered cautiously, bearing gifts and a bottle of wine. He looked better than he had in weeks, less haunted, more present. Merry Christmas, Mom, he said, embracing me tentatively. Merry Christmas, Derek. I returned his hug, noting with approval that he'd gained back some weight. Frankie arrived shortly after, looking uncharacteristically nervous in clean jeans and a pressed shirt, a small wrapped package in his hands. You didn't need to bring anything, I told him, ushering him inside. My grandmother would haunt me if I showed up empty-handed, he replied with a small smile. Introductions were initially awkward, Derek clearly assessing the man who had helped expose his wife's schemes, Frankie reserved but polite. But as we sat down to dinner, the atmosphere gradually warmed, aided by good food and carefully neutral conversation about the house. Renovations, the unseasonably heavy snow, and Derek's new photography hobby. After dinner, we moved to the living room, where a small fire crackled in the hearth. Derek hesitantly presented his gift to me, a framed black-and-white photograph he'd taken of the rose garden behind the townhouse, captured an early morning frost. It's beautiful, I said, genuinely moved. You have your father's eye. For detail, Frankie's gift was a hand-carved wooden box, its lid inlaid with a delicate pattern of roses. For your desk, he explained, for important papers and such. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, touched beyond words by the hours of careful work it represented. Thank you. It's perfect. Later, after Derek had departed and Frankie had helped clear the last of the dishes, we stood on the porch watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. Thank you for today, he said quietly. It's been a long time since Christmas felt like Christmas. For me too, I admitted. I wasn't sure I could face it without Harold, but it was good. Different, but good. Frankie turned to face me, his expression serious in the glow of the Christmas lights. Grace, I want you to know something. I've never met anyone like you, someone who faced what you did and came through it with such dignity. You've made me believe in second chances again. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within me, a place that had been dormant since Harold's death, or perhaps even before. Not the same as what I'd felt with my husband, but something new, unexpected, and quietly hopeful. We've both been given second chances, I replied softly. I'm grateful ours have intersected. As Frankie walked back to his cottage through the moonlit snow, I remained on the porch, watching until he disappeared from view. The night was cold but brilliantly clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. For the first time in many months, I felt not just at peace, but alive with possibility. Whatever came next, whatever this new chapter held, I would face it on my own terms, with hard-won wisdom and an open heart. Spring arrived in New Paltz with an explosion of green, transforming the landscape around the country house. Daffodils pushed through the soil where Harold had planted them years before, and the cherry trees lining the driveway burst into clouds of pale pink. Blossoms. Nature's cycle continued, indifferent to human dramas, but offering its own gentle reminder that renewal always follows dormancy. As April turned to May, I found myself spending more time in the garden, reclaiming flower beds that had been neglected during Harold's illness, and the turmoil that followed his death. There was something profoundly healing about plunging my hands into the soil, coaxing new growth from forgotten corners of the property. Frankie often joined me, his carpentry skills proving equally useful in building trellises for climbing roses and repairing the old greenhouse where I planned to start vegetables. Our friendship had deepened over the winter months, evolving into something neither of us had named, but both acknowledged through small, meaningful gestures, coffee prepared exactly as the other preferred, favorite books loaned and discussed, comfortable silences that required no filling. On a particularly warm Saturday, we worked together transplanting seedlings in the greenhouse. Sunlight streamed through the glass panels, creating a peaceful cocoon of warmth and greenery. I received an interesting call yesterday, I mentioned, carefully, patting soil around a tiny tomato plant. Oh? Frankie looked up from the irrigation system he was adjusting. From the Senior Advocacy Center where Chloe's been doing her community service. They want me to speak at a conference next month about recognizing financial exploitation. Frankie's eyebrows rose. Are you going to do it? I nodded, surprising myself with how certain I felt. I think so. If my experience can help even one person avoid what I went through, it would be worth it. You'd be good at it, he said with quiet confidence. You have a way of explaining things that makes people listen. I smiled, warmed by his faith in me. The director mentioned that Chloe has been surprisingly effective in her role there. Apparently, she knows all the tricks because she used them. Herself. Poetic justice, Frankie observed. That's what Patricia called it, I agreed. Speaking of justice, Mr. Harrington's former partners reached out. They're creating a fund to compensate clients who may have been harmed by his actions. They asked if I would serve on the oversight committee. Frankie whistled softly. Quite a change from last fall when they were trying to declare you incompetent. Amazing what a potential class action lawsuit can do for one's reputation, I replied dryly. We worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the soft patter of water from the irrigation system and birdsong filtering through the open greenhouse door. Derek stopped by the cottage yesterday, Frankie said eventually, his tone casual, but his eyes carefully watching my reaction. This was unexpected. Oh? What did he want? To thank me, he said, for helping you, and to ask about my intentions. I nearly dropped the trowel I was holding. He did what? Frankie's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Very formal, very protective. Said he'd failed you once and wasn't going to let it happen again. A complex tangle of emotions rose in my chest. Irritation at Derek's. Presumption, a reluctant appreciation for his protective instinct, and something else. Something related to the unspoken current that had been developing between Frankie and me. I hope you told him that my intentions are none of his business, I said, attempting to keep my tone light. Actually, Frankie set down his tools and turned to face me fully. I told him the truth, that I care about you deeply, that I respect you too much to ever pressure you in any way, and that whatever happens between us will be entirely your decision. The greenhouse suddenly seemed very warm, the air between us charged with possibilities neither of us had voiced until now. And what did Derek say to that? I asked softly. He said that sounded exactly like what his father would want for you. Frankie's eyes held mine steadily. And then he asked if I'd join you both for dinner sometime next week. I felt a laugh bubble up, unexpected and genuine. Well, that's progress, I suppose. Frankie smiled, the tension easing. I thought so too. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the gardens, we sat on the porch swing Harold had built, watching fireflies begin their nightly dance among the wall. Trees. What are you thinking? Frankie asked, his voice gentle in the gathering darkness. I considered the question carefully. I'm thinking about time, how it changes everything, heals wounds, reveals truths. 6 months ago, I was drowning in grief and betrayal. Now, I gestured vaguely at the peaceful scene before us, at the space between us on the swing. Now I'm finding joy again. It feels both disloyal and absolutely right. Harold wouldn't want you to stop living, Frankie observed. No, I agreed. He wouldn't. He told me as much, actually, in a letter I found after he died. Live, he wrote. Just that. Live. Frankie's hand found mine in the darkness, his fingers warm and solid as they intertwined with my own. We sat that way for a long time, not speaking, not needing to, as stars appeared overhead and the scent of jasmine drifted from the garden. The following week brought the promised dinner with Derek. I chose a neutral location, a small Italian restaurant in town that had been a family favorite when Derek was growing up. My son arrived early, already seated when Frankie and I entered together. Derek stood, his greeting more relaxed than I had anticipated. Mom. Frankie, thanks for coming. We settled into the comfortable rhythm of ordering drinks and appetizers, the initial awkwardness gradually dissolving as we found safe topics. The unusually warm spring, Derek's new apartment, my upcoming speaking engagement. I've been meaning to tell you, Derek said as our main courses arrived. I'm starting my own business, small-scale furniture design, focusing on sustainable materials. I looked up in surprise. Like your father? A flash of something, pride, regret, determination, crossed Derek's face. Inspired by him, yes, but my own vision. I've rented a small workshop space downtown. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. Harold had always hoped Derek would follow in his footsteps, but had never pushed, understanding that such passions couldn't be forced. Actually, Derek continued, glancing at Frankie, I was hoping to get some advice. Frankie mentioned he worked as a carpenter before life took a detour, Frankie supplied with a self-deprecating smile. The conversation shifted then, the two men discussing wood types and joinery techniques with growing animation. I watched them, these two important men in my very different lives, finding common ground in craftsmanship and creation. By the time dessert arrived, something had subtly shifted in our dynamic. Not forgiveness exactly, that remained an ongoing process, but perhaps understanding, a recognition that while the past couldn't be changed, the future was still unwritten. As we prepared to leave, Derek pulled a small package from his pocket. I found this while clearing out some old boxes. I thought you might want it. Inside was a faded photograph I hadn't seen in years. Harold at 26, standing proudly beside the first piece of furniture he'd ever sold commercially. His smile, captured in that moment of triumph, was mirrored in our son's face across the table. Thank you, I said softly, touching the image gently. Outside the restaurant, Derek hesitated, then embraced me awkwardly. I'm trying, Mom, he whispered, to be better, to be worthy of being his son, your son. I held him for a moment, this child of my heart who had hurt me so deeply and who was now struggling to find his way back. I know, I told him. That's all any of us can do. Try to be better today than we were yesterday. As Frankie and I drove back to the country house, the photograph rested in my lap, a tangible connection to the past that somehow made the present more vivid, more precious. Good evening? Frankie asked, glancing over at me. Better than I expected, I admitted. Seeing Derek taking an interest in Harold's work, it means something. Legacy is important, Frankie agreed. Not just what we leave behind, but how it changes those who remain. At the house, we paused on the porch, reluctant to end the evening. The spring night was mild, scented with flowering trees and possibilities. Grace, Frankie began, his voice low and serious. I need to tell you something. I turned to face him, suddenly nervous. What is it? I've been offered a job, a good one, with a restoration company in Albany. The kind of work I used to do before things fell apart. My heart seemed to stutter in my chest. Oh, that's wonderful. When would you start? That's just it, he said, moving a step closer. I told them I needed to think about it. Because the thing is, Grace, I don't want to leave, not unless you want me to. The world seemed to narrow to just this porch, this moment, this man standing before me with honesty in his eyes. And a question he wasn't quite asking directly. I don't want you to leave, I said softly, the truth of it resonating through me. But I don't want to hold you back either. Frankie's hand came up to gently touch my cheek. The only thing holding me back was myself. You helped me find my way again, Grace. Whatever happens between us, I'll always be grateful for that. In the gentle May night, surrounded by the gardens Harold had planted and the house he had loved, I made a choice. Stepping forward, I closed the distance between us and kissed Frankie, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't forgetting. It was, as Harold had instructed me, simply living. 1 year to the day after that fateful family dinner, the one where Chloe had fainted at the Sight of me holding evidence of her betrayal, I stood once again in the dining room of the country house. But this time, instead of tension and deceit, the room was filled with warmth and honest conversation. The table was set for a small gathering. Derek and his new girlfriend Julia, Martin and his wife Elaine, Patricia Winters, and of course, Frankie. Outside, October painted the landscape in rich golds and crimsons, a perfect backdrop for what I had come to think of as a celebration of renewal. In the kitchen, finishing touches were being added to Harold's favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables, crusty bread, and apple pie for dessert. I had prepared most of it myself, finding comfort in these familiar rituals, but Julia had contributed a spectacular salad, and Frankie had baked the bread. Need any help? Derek appeared in the doorway, looking more like his father than ever in a blue sweater that matched his eyes. You could open the wine, I suggested, checking the roast one final time. As he moved around the kitchen with comfortable familiarity, I was struck by how much had changed in 12 months. Derek's furniture design business was small, but growing steadily. He'd met Julia, an architectural designer, when she commissioned a custom conference table for her firm. His divorce from Chloe had been finalized in the summer, a quiet ending to a relationship built on shaky foundations. Chloe herself had completed her community service hours and, surprisingly, had been hired as a consultant by the same senior advocacy organization. Her understanding of exploitation tactics made her valuable in their education programs. We had no direct contact, but through Patricia, I occasionally heard that she seemed genuinely committed to making amends in her own way. Everything looks amazing, Mom, Derek said, pouring himself a glass of water. He hesitated, then added, Dad would love this, all of us together. Yes, I agreed, unexpectedly moved by the observation. He would. The sound of laughter drifted in from the living room, where the others were gathered. Frankie's voice rose above the others, recounting a story about our misadventures replacing the porch screens. You and Frankie seem good together, Derek observed, his tone carefully neutral. I smiled, appreciating his effort. We are. Different from what I had with your father, but good in its own way. Derek nodded. I wasn't sure at first, but he makes you happy. That's what matters. Your father would agree, I said gently. I know. Derek met my eyes directly. He told me once, years ago, that if anything happened to him, he hoped you wouldn't be alone, that you had too much love to give. This was news to me. A final gift from Harold, delivered through our son. Before I could respond, the oven timer chimed, signaling that dinner was ready. As we all gathered around the table, this table where betrayal had been exposed and family bonds shattered, I took a moment to appreciate the healing that had occurred. Not perfect restoration. There were still scars, still moments of remembered pain, but genuine healing nonetheless. Martin raised his glass. To Harold, he said simply, who brought us all together in ways he couldn't have imagined. To Harold, we echoed, and I felt the familiar ache of missing him tempered now by gratitude for the life we had shared and the legacy he had left behind. As conversation flowed around me, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The shock of discovering Chloe's betrayal, the pain of Derek's complicity, the unexpected friendship with Frankie that had blossomed into something deeper and more sustaining than I could have anticipated. My speaking engagements at senior centers had expanded into a regular series of workshops on financial protection, reaching hundreds of older adults throughout the county. The work gave purpose to my experience, transforming personal pain into communal protection. You're quiet, Grace, Frankie observed softly as dessert was being served. Everything okay? I smiled at him, this man who had appeared in my life at precisely the moment I needed someone to believe in me. Just thinking about full circles, how we end up exactly where we're meant to be, even when the path takes unexpected turns. After dinner, as twilight descended, our guests gradually departed, Martineau and Elaine heading home to relieve their babysitter, Patricia leaving for an early court appearance the next morning, Derek and Julia driving back to their respective apartments in town. Frankie and I stood on the porch, waving goodbye as headlights disappeared down the long driveway. The evening air carried the crisp scent of autumn, apples and wood smoke and fallen leaves. That went well, Frankie observed, his arm comfortable around my waist. Better than last year's dinner, I replied with dry humor. He laughed, pulling me closer. Slightly less dramatic, I'd say. We walked inside together, moving through the familiar rooms that held so many memories, old and new intermingling. In the study, Harold's photograph smiled down from the wall, while beside it hung a framed newspaper article about my advocacy work. On the desk sat the beautiful wooden box Frankie had carved for me, now holding Harold's letters alongside new ones Frankie had written during a brief trip to visit his brother in California. "I have something to ask you," Frankie said, as we settled on the sofa before the fireplace. "That sounds serious," I replied, noting the slight tension in his voice. "It is. Actually," he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." My heart began to race as he opened the box, revealing not a diamond ring, but a simple silver key. "A key?" I asked, confused. "To the cottage," he explained. "I know we've been taking things slowly, and I respect that. But I thought, maybe it's time. We decided where home really is, for both of us." I took the key, understanding dawning. "Are you asking me to move into the cottage with you?" He smiled, shaking his head. "No, Grace. I'm asking if you want me to move into the main house with you, or if you'd prefer to join me in the cottage, or even if you want to sell both and find something that's just ours. I don't care about the structure. I care about building a life with you." Tears pricked at my eyes, not from sadness, but from the simple, profound joy of being truly seen and understood. "I never expected this," I admitted. "At 65, to be starting over." "Not starting over," Frankie corrected gently. "Continuing with a new chapter." I looked around the room that held so much of my history with Harold. There had been a time when I couldn't imagine sharing this space with anyone else. But now I realized the house itself was less important than the love it contained. The main house, I decided. It's too big for just me, and the cottage is too small for both of us. Besides, I added with a smile, Harold would approve. He always said houses should be filled with life. Frankie's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled, that particular expression I had come to love. "Are you sure?" In answer, I closed his fingers around the key. "Keep this. The cottage will make a perfect workshop for your carpentry and my gardening projects. And maybe someday, a place for grandchildren to have adventures." Later that night, as we lay together in the quiet darkness of what had once been only my room, Frankie's steady, breathing beside me, I thought about the strange, winding path that had led me here. How the worst betrayal of my life had ultimately opened the door to unexpected joy. How strength could emerge from vulnerability, and new love from devastating loss. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering against the roof in a soothing rhythm. Through the window, I could just make out the silhouette of Harold's oak tree, still standing strong after all these years, its branches reaching skyward in the darkness. I had survived the winter of grief and betrayal, had found my way through the uncertain spring of healing, had blossomed in the summer of new beginnings. And now, as autumn returned, I found myself not at an ending, but at a continuation, a life richer for having been broken and mended, stronger at the repaired places. The man who had tried to warn me outside the gates 1 year ago now slept peacefully beside me, his presence a testament to the unexpected gifts that sometimes arrive in the midst of our deepest pain. The son who had nearly betrayed me was finding his way back to his father's legacy and his own integrity. And I was neither erased nor diminished, but expanded, encompassing both who I had been and who I was becoming. In the morning, I would wake to make coffee for two, would continue planning the bathroom renovation Frankie and I had been discussing, would call Derek about Sunday dinner, would live, fully, intentionally, gratefully, just as Harold had instructed me to do. But for now, I simply closed my eyes and allowed myself to rest in the peaceful knowledge that I had not just survived the storm, but had emerged from it with unexpected treasures, renewed purpose, deeper wisdom, and a heart that, against all odds, had remembered how to love again.